She never closed the curtains until the night someone made sure they were. Welcome to McGray's Casebook. I am your host, Elderton. This community we've built together is incredible. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. Hearing from you all makes this journey even more special. The story starts now. It was remarked, not without indignation, that no respectable parlour maid in England would leave the drawing-room curtains open past dusk. Mrs. Blaine, the vicar's wife, declared the thing a scandal to the whole of Little Barton. And yet, on the night in question, the curtains of Ashcombe Lodge gaped wide like an immodest mouth, exposing the lamplight within to the cold October street. It was through that gap, according to the milkman, that he had seen the master of the house slumped in his armchair, his evening paper slipping to carpet, his head tilted back in an attitude curiously reminiscent of a stage Hamlet rehearsing a death scene. By the time the footman stirred from his card game in the scullery, the master was stone dead and the household in a state of well-drilled confusion. The coroner, when summoned, muttered something about apoplexy. The local constable, eager to demonstrate initiative, took down names in a smudged notebook. But the scene had by then acquired a certain air of the theatrical, for Mrs. Blaine, still preoccupied with the curtains, insisted it was not natural for a man so punctilious as Mr. Harcourt to be found in his chair without his slippers neatly aligned. It was at this precise moment that Lord Peter Wimsey, whose Daimler had suffered an undignified sputter on the lane outside, drifted in with the apologetic courtesy of a guest arriving late to a tedious dinner. His monocle glittered faintly as he surveyed the corpse, the open curtains, and the outraged clergyman's wife in one sweep of amused detachment. "My dear madam," he murmured, with that drawl which contrived to sound both courteous and faintly reproving, "do forgive me, but if the young lady of the house has never once remembered to close the curtains, I should say it is a matter of character rather than conspiracy, though," and here he tapped the dead man's newspaper with one languid finger, "character, as Aristotle assures us, has a most inconvenient way of entangling itself with destiny, even, alas, in matters of upholstery." The remark was not reassuring to Mrs. Blaine, who immediately began invoking Providence in a manner which suggested she believed Wimsey to be half a heretic. Meanwhile, Wimsey stooped to retrieve the paper from the carpet. A curious ring of damp marked the margin where the hand had rested, though there was no sign of spilled tea. He raised an eyebrow, murmured, "Odd what?" and allowed the constable to bustle forward, already convinced the matter was satisfactorily concluded. Only Wimsey lingered by the curtains, gazing at the street lamp outside as though the angle of its light upon the glass were of more consequence than the body cooling in the chair. It was the lamp that decided him. Wimsey touched the glass lightly with the back of his fingers and found it neither too warm nor quite cold. A corpulent thing in a bronze base that had been burning for some time, but not for so long as the exasperated clergyman's wife declared. His hand, straying outward as if in forgetfulness, tested the sash. The window was shut and latched, the curtains drawn back by their cords like obedient mares. When he turned from the glass, his eye travelled down the fall of fabric to the skirting. There the curtain's hem, stiff with starch and a little knotted where a maid's iron had hesitated, left a pale line in the dust upon the floor, indicating how it usually hung when drawn. It had not been drawn that evening. He allowed the constable to clear his throat importantly and present names with the air of a man dealing trump cards. "James Pike, footman, Lily Pratt, parlour-maid, Mrs. Dyer, housekeeper. Cook is Mrs. Prout, but she's in a state, sir. The milkman, Arthur Byng, saw the deceased at 7:45, by his reckoning. Mr. Harcourt's sister, Miss Lydia Harcourt, is upstairs. Quiet like." The constable looked gratified at this inventory, then, recalling his part in things, added, "Death seemed natural, my lord. He looked gone." "An exact diagnosis," said Whimsy sweetly. "Let us, nevertheless, ask the house what it knows of its master." The drawing-room felt theatrical and faintly willing to talk. Rooms do when the wrong body sits down in them. Whimsy set the newspaper once more upon the small mahogany table and placed his own cuff beside the faint, damp imprint on the margin, measuring without the appearance of doing so. The ring was smaller than a tumbler, larger than a wine-glass, not tea, no tannin shadow, nor, judging by the lack of sugar grit, any sweet mixture. His gaze skimmed the puddled wax in the ashtray. Gents who smoked cigars often put the match there to die, and the pale scatter of ash on the carpet, which had been brushed at in a flurry, leaving a telltale smear. Mr. Harcourt, in his chair, had watched the lamplight and the street without drawing the curtains, and somebody had afterwards tried to rub out that little indiscretion of ash. "Mrs. Dyer," he said, as the housekeeper came in, full of kept-back opinions and starched propriety. "Forgive an impertinent stranger. Will you be so kind as to tell me the hour at which the curtains are commonly closed at Ashcombe Lodge?" "Winter or summer, my lord?" asked Mrs. Dyer at once, with professional pride. "In summer, not before 9. In winter, 5 o'clock without fail. Unless Miss Lydia gives order to the contrary, which she does not." "And tonight?" Mrs. Dyer looked as if somebody had failed to say grace before meat. The parlour-maid forgot herself. "I'm that ashamed." "Forgot herself," murmured Whimsy, as though he were trying the phrase on for size. "And Miss Lydia?" "Miss Lydia had a caller before tea, my lord," said the housekeeper, smoothing her apron. "And after tea she went up to write her letters. The master didn't like the curtains shut while he read. He said it made a man sleepy to be wrapped up like a parcel. The hour for tea? 6:30 to 7. A proper household gives times with the precision of a railway table. Mr. Harcourt took his in the drawing-room, Miss Lydia in the morning-room, as she had Mr. Swithins with her. "Mr. Swithins?" "A gentleman from the office, Mr. Harcourt's office, that is. He brought papers. They talked close and low, but not long. He left at 5 minutes to 7. I saw his back at the door. He walked off fast, as though the street were a hill." "And the parlour-maid?" "Lily is young," Mrs. Dyer allowed, with the air of one making a charitable bequest to a scapegrace. "She should have drawn the curtains when she took in the tea-tray. She says the lamp and the colour of the sky made her forget. I shall speak to her." "One mustn't let the sky interfere with duty," said Whimsy gravely. "Thank you, Mrs. Dyer. Send me Lily, if you please, and James, Mr. Pike, afterwards." Lily came in with the hunted look peculiar to maids confronted suddenly with the moral universe. She dropped a curtsy to nobody in particular, then another to Whimsy by way of correction. "You took in tea to Mr. Harcourt," said Whimsy, so kindly that Lily's lower lip steadied. "Where was the tray set?" "On the little table by the arm of the chair, my lord." She pointed to the table where the newspaper now lay. "He had his cup and the little jug of milk, but he likes no sugar. I always put 2 biscuits. He never takes them." "And the cup?" Mrs. Dyer took the tray out again, my lord, when the bell rang for them to clear. Lily looked earnestly at the table, as though willing the china to reappear and vindicate her. I did forget the curtains," she finished miserably. "Habit's a curious beast," said Whimsy. "Tell me about yours. At what hour do you generally sweep the drawing-room? Do you dust first, then sweep, or sweep first, then dust?" "Dust, then sweep, my lord. Mrs. Dyer says the dust falls, so you must sweep after." "Very sensible of Mrs. Dyer. And the ash-tray, do you empty it always, Lily, or only when it overflows?" "When it's used, my lord. Mr. Harcourt likes it clean." Whimsy glanced at the ashtray with its little volcano of grey. He was perhaps less exacting this evening. "Who laid the fire?" "James did, my lord, before luncheon." "Thank you, Lily. One very last question. When you brought the tea in, was the street lamp lit?" Lily knit her brows. "It was dim, my lord. It was just coming on like a bashful actor at his first entrance," said Whimsy, smiling. "You've been very helpful. Ask James to be so good." James Pike presented a face of injured virtue, young, big-boned, with a footman's dignity and a boy's freckled ears. He stood square, as if on parade. "You were playing cards," said Whimsy. "With Tom the gardener, my lord, just hands, nothing wicked. Tom was mending the scullery door and said we might as well keep the life in us." "At what hour?" "Between 7 and 8, my lord. Tom says the clock in the hall was striking the half when the bell rung. We thought it were the front, but it were Miss Lydia's morning-room bell. Mrs. Dyer went. I sat down again." "The front bell, was it rung at all this evening?" "Once, my lord, Mr. Swithins. I let him out at 5 to 7. He had a bag with him and his hat set back like he were thinking hard." "Mr. Pike, forgive another impertinence. When you laid the fire at luncheon, did you notice whether the window catch was in order?" "In order, my lord." "And the curtains?" "Drawn back, my lord, as always in the daytime." "Very good. Another small curiosity, Mr. Harcourt's slippers are, I am told, fastidiously aligned when he sits here in the evenings. Who aligns them?" James reddened. "Me, my lord. He liked 'em straight to the hearth, left one a touch forward. He'd nudge me with his stick if I forgot." Whimsy looked down at the pair beneath the chair. One was skewed out like an untidy foot. He did not touch them. "You have not aligned them tonight." "No, my lord, it didn't seem—" He swallowed. "Number quite." Whimsy turned away as if the subject were indelicate. "Tell me about Mr. Swithins. Did he and Mr. Harcourt quarrel? Softly, violently, not at all?" "They spoke soft, my lord. Mr. Swithins said something like, 'There's no need to make a show of it,' and the master says, 'There will be no show, there will be order.' I don't hold with eavesdropping, my lord," James added, with that curious English pathos which insists on confessing small sins to validate large virtues. "Nor I," said Whimsy. "We must leave that to the angels. Go along, James. You've been admirable." When the door closed, Whimsy stood a moment in the hush and listened to the house's deep noises, the tick of the French clock on the mantel. 5. Minutes fast by his watch. The subdued clatter from a distressed kitchen, the wind moving like old silk in the chimney. He knelt and examined the rug, then the little semicircle of rubbed pile, where a chair was often turned toward the fire. The chair now faced the street. One could, from that angle, see both the lamp outside and the mantel-shelf clock. A man punctilious about his slippers would notice at once if the clock were running fast, unless he had set his habit by it. The constable, encouraged by his own importance, hovered. "If it's not rude to ask, my lord, do you think there's anything, well, wrong?" "My dear." "Sir," said Whimsy, "there is everything wrong. Only we must discover which wrong thing is the right one for our purpose. Mr. Harcourt is dead. That is wrong from his point of view. The curtains are open. That is wrong from Mrs. Blaine's. The clock is fast. That is wrong from the standpoint of trains. Somebody has been brushing ash where it has no moral claim to be, which is wrong from mine. We are spoiled for choice." He drifted to the door, looked into the hall, and then beckoned with one finger to the constable. "Will you do me a service? Ask Mr. Byng, our milkman, whether the street lamp was burning properly when he passed at 7:45. Not merely on, but bright." "Bright, my lord." "Precisely. There are lamps that burn as though they regretted it. This one, I fancy, performs with decision. And then Miss Lydia, if you please." Miss Lydia Harcourt came in with the defined composure of a woman who has rehearsed it upstairs. She was thin, the kind of thin that appears moral. Her hair was arranged in the simple style of a person who does not wish to be thought frivolous, and who therefore is. She looked at Whimsy as one might look at an unfamiliar curate, uncertain whether he would produce comfort or Latin. "You have been most patient," said Whimsy. "I shall not keep you long. You saw your brother after tea." "He was reading," said Miss Lydia. "The paper. He preferred to be quiet before the 8 o'clock news. He felt the day had too much noise in it. He said our post-war civilization suffers from an excess of opinions." "A man of discernment," said Whimsy. "And Mr. Swithins?" "Mr. Swithins brought papers about our investments." "Ah, yours or your brother's?" "The family's," said Miss Lydia, and then, to her own annoyance, coloured. "My brother was the trustee for certain sums left by our father. There has been a rearrangement." "Rearrangement is a beautiful word," said Whimsy, regarding the curtain cord with interest. "It suggests that the pieces remain the same, and only their position alters. Did Mr. Swithins approve?" "Mr. Swithins is not paid to approve," said Miss Lydia, a little too quickly. "He is paid to draw up what is decided." "And what was decided?" "That will be in the papers, Lord Peter." "I have no doubt of it." He paused. "Your brother disliked the curtains being drawn while he read. Does he also dislike slippers at the wrong angle?" "James attends to those things. I never notice them." "Then forgive one last intrusion. When you left your brother, were the curtains as they are now?" Miss Lydia looked for the first time at the gaping windows as though they were staring back at her. "I don't remember," she said. "I suppose they were." "Memory's an old gentleman who dozes after dinner," said Whimsy pleasantly. "Thank you. You will not leave the house tonight, I hope?" "Certainly not," said Miss Lydia, affronted. She hesitated, then, "You do not think—" "He has had faintness before. Our doctor calls it a warning." "Doctors are fond of the future tense," said Whimsy. "It gives them a pleasantly prophetic air. We will ask him for his warning presently." She withdrew with careful steps. Whimsy returned to the table, leaned over the newspaper, and, with a fastidious finger, traced the edge of the damp ring again. He bent, caught a very faint odour, nothing so vulgar as spirits, something medicinal without sweetness, a ghost of camphor or eucalyptus that had nearly gone. He straightened with a small "ha," which meant very little and everything. The constable reappeared, flushed with errand. "Mr. Byng says the lamp were bright as a fairground, my lord. They serviced it yesterday, he thinks. The borough did a sweep. He noticed because it threw a grand blaze on the glass. He says you could see in as clear as a shop window." "Could you indeed?" Whimsy looked once more from the lamplight to the chair turned to face it. Then somebody was meant to see something. Either the living man, reading the opinion-less paper, or the dead one, doing a very fine imitation. We must decide which. He clicked his watch shut. "We will trouble Mr. Swithins next, and the doctor, and the timetable of the lamp men. Meanwhile," his voice became mild, "I should like to see the scullery where James and Tom were dealing with their consciences and a pack of cards. Rooms talk to each other in a house. This one," he added, with a glance at the open curtains, "has been talking rather too loudly." Lord Peter followed the constable into the rear passage with the air of a man who had stumbled upon an antiquarian curiosity rather than a murder. The scullery smelled of damp boards and boiled cabbage. A little table, scarred by years of pans, thumped down in irritation, had been pressed into service for a game of whist or something less dignified. 2 chairs drawn haphazardly, a few cards still face down, as though ashamed of themselves. A lamp sputtered overhead, throwing patches of light that exaggerated the stains on the wall. "Tom was here?" Whimsy asked, picking up one of the cards by its corner. It was the 7 of spades, worn soft with use. He balanced it on a finger like a conjurer. "Yes, my lord," said the constable, evidently relieved to have a simple fact at hand. "Tom stayed until just after past, said the door hinges were right stiff and he needed to file them." "And James sat here?" Whimsy placed the card carefully back on the table, slightly off its previous angle. "Did anyone come through this passage whilst they were occupied with hinges and conscience?" The constable shifted. "Mrs. Dyer once, to fetch some polish. Lily came for a bucket, but neither lingered. They say they didn't hear anything." Whimsy bent to the bucket in question. It was still damp, a smear of grey water clinging to its rim. He touched it delicately, then examined his fingertips. "Ash," he said. "Not hearth ash. Pipe ash, perhaps. Coarser. Curious to find it here, when our drawing-room seems to have claimed all the ash on its own carpet." He replaced the bucket with exaggerated care and strolled to the scullery door. It looked upon a narrow yard, cobbled and slick with drizzle. The latch bore fresh scouring marks from the file. Whimsy tested it. The door opened with a small groan, then shut neatly. "Did Mr. Harcourt favour this exit?" he asked. "Never knew him to use it," said the constable. "That was for staff and deliveries." "Then whoever brushed the ash from the drawing-room rug may have had second thoughts here." Whimsy dusted his fingers on a handkerchief. "One brushes hurriedly when the bell rings. One tips the remains into the nearest receptacle, meaning to finish later." "Yes." "Mrs. Dyer or Lily in zeal? Or some other hand that should not have been in the drawing-room at all?" The constable blinked, unhappy. Whimsy's smile returned, light and silvery. "Never mind, my dear sir. A murder is like an amateur dramatics rehearsal. Everybody stumbles on stage at the wrong moment and insists he belongs there. The trick is to discover which player has mistaken tragedy for farce." They returned by the side passage, emerging once more into the hall. The long case clock ticked with offensive certainty, its hands lagging 3 minutes behind Whimsy's watch, whereas the mantel clock in the drawing-room had been 5 minutes fast. Whimsy studied the pair of them with affectionate contempt. "Clocks, constable," he murmured, "are like gossiping neighbours. No two ever agree, and each is certain of its own rectitude." Miss Lydia was gliding down the stairs, a letter clutched in her hand. She paused upon seeing them and drew herself up. "I meant to send for Dr. Fenton," she said. "Surely one should—" "One should, by all means," said Whimsy. "But permit me a small liberty. The letter is addressed to whom?" She glanced down, startled. "To the doctor, of course." "Why?" "Because letters have a nasty habit of speaking louder than their writers intend. Will you allow me?" Miss Lydia hesitated, then surrendered it. Whimsy read it at a glance, a conventional summons couched in proper horror, requesting the doctor's immediate attendance. He returned it with a bow. "Quite proper, though the doctor is unlikely to find your brother's pulse improved by delay. Constable, send a boy at once. Meanwhile, Miss Lydia, will you indulge me with a few more household facts?" She yielded, though stiffly, to his questions. Dinner had been ordered for 8. Harcourt was in the habit of dressing punctually. He had rung for hot water a few minutes before 7, then dismissed Lily with a wave, preferring solitude as he read. He disliked being interrupted before the evening news broadcast. The wireless, Whimsy noted, sat upon a small sideboard, switched off. "And what of your caller, Mr. Swithins?" Miss Lydia's colour rose again. "He came to review documents. My brother wished to transfer some holdings. It was complicated. Mr. Swithins grew heated, but he is not a violent man." Violence is a matter of imagination rather than strength, said Wimsey. Still, I shall be glad to test his temper. Where does he live? In town, near the station. He dines habitually at the King's Arms when business brings him here. Excellent. Constable, a note of that. Wimsey turned, tapping his lip thoughtfully. Now tell me, Miss Harcourt, do you recall whether your brother's glass was full when you left him? Her brows drew together. Glass? The one upon the table beside him. A man reading often sips as he turns a page. I saw no glass, she said, puzzled. Wimsey smiled faintly. That is what interests me, the things not seen. Thank you, Miss Lydia. The doctor will be here soon, and you must rest. Pray allow me to conduct the impertinences. She inclined her head with chilly dignity, and withdrew once more. Alone with the constable, Wimsey leaned over the armchair. The faint medicinal odour persisted. He touched the cushion. A trace of damp lingered there too, where a head had lolled. He examined the hearth, then the slippers again, noting the uneven position. One slipper bore a faint smear upon its toe, darkened as if by a brush dipped hastily in soot. Somebody, he murmured, has been conducting housekeeping with uncommon zeal. The constable was fidgeting. Begging pardon, my lord, but if you think it's poison, ought we not keep everyone out? We shall, in due course. At present, I prefer the company. People shut up too soon develop alibis like mushrooms after rain. Let them wander, let them talk, let them contradict one another. It makes the harvest sweeter. A commotion at the front door announced Dr. Fenton, a dry little man with pince-nez and a tendency to peer as though the world were a specimen on his tray. He inspected the body with professional grunts, then produced a stethoscope for form's sake. Dead an hour or more, he pronounced. Apoplexy, no doubt. The man's arteries were never good. Arteries are such indiscreet fellows, said Wimsey. They will burst into conversation at the worst times. But tell me, doctor, does apoplexy leave a scent of camphor? Camphor? Dr. Fenton blinked. Unless he had a tonic, did he? The housekeeper was summoned. No tonic was kept in the drawing-room. Mr. Harcourt took a draught at night, but that stood upstairs untouched. The doctor shrugged, uninterested. Well then, let the poor man rest. I will sign the certificate in the morning. Excellent, said Wimsey. And in the meantime, will you permit me to delay the burial of truth until we have examined it by daylight? The doctor stared, baffled, and departed in offended dignity. Wimsey, unmoved, stooped once more at the table, measuring again the damp ring, the ash, the misaligned slippers. The constable whispered, You think it's murder? My dear sir, said Wimsey, eyes twinkling, if we call it murder, we must find a murderer. If we call it apoplexy, the murderer will thank Providence. The question is not what I think, but what the facts are whispering behind their hands. As the house settled again into uneasy murmurs, Wimsey requested that the servants be gathered in the hall. They came reluctantly, Mrs. Dyer, with compressed lips, Lily, red-eyed, James defiant, and cook, wringing her hands in a pudding-spotted apron. Ladies and gentlemen, said Wimsey, with courtly gravity, forgive me if I detain you at this uncomfortable hour. I require but a morsel of information. At what times, precisely, do each of you wind or set the clocks in this house? They exchanged uneasy glances. Mrs. Dyer admitted to winding the long case in the hall each Sunday. James confessed he sometimes adjusted the mantel clock when instructed. Lily never touched them. Cook swore she left such matters to others. Then how, asked Wimsey softly, does the hall clock lag 3 minutes while the mantel leaps 5 ahead? Who has been tampering with time? For my own part, I dislike a household where the hours go crooked. One may lose not only minutes, but lives. He let the words hang in the air. The servants shifted uneasy, each privately examining his own conscience. Whimsy, satisfied, dismissed them with a bow. When they were gone, he stood by the window, gazing at the lamp that blazed outside. Its light fell clear across the glass, illuminating the corpse in the chair. Anyone passing would have seen it, seen him, apparently alive, perhaps, until nearer inspection revealed otherwise. A puppet displayed for the street, curtains ostentatiously left open. Very theatrical, Whimsy murmured, as though somebody wished to set a stage, an audience outside, an actor within, but the play closed too soon. He tapped the window pane lightly, then turned back. "Constable, we shall pay our respects to Mr. Swithin's at the King's Arms. I fancy he may know whether this performance was written in one act or two." And with that, Whimsy reached for his hat, his face alight with ironic amusement, as though the world had presented him with an intricate crossword and forgotten to remove the solution from the back page. The rain had begun again, an indifferent drizzle that misted the lamps and made the pavements gleam like tarnished silver. Whimsy's Daimler, having received a coaxing from the constable's energetic crank handle, consented to convey them into the little market square. The King's Arms stood there, its windows glowing with the fugitive cheer of a provincial inn. Inside, the air was thick with pipe smoke and the homely odour of boiled beef. A few townsmen nursed their pints with solemnity, while the landlord, in shirt-sleeves and waistcoat, polished glasses as though they were witnesses he intended to silence. Mr. Swithin's was easy to spot. He sat at a table near the hearth, his briefcase at his feet, his hair damp with mist. He was a narrow man, pinched at the edges, with eyes that seemed perpetually on the brink of protest. At the sight of Whimsy and the constable, he stiffened, then attempted the refuge of his tankard. It did him little good. "Mr. Swithin's," said Whimsy pleasantly, removing his gloves with the air of a man arriving for a concert. "We intrude at an unholy hour. You will forgive us if we make ourselves comfortable." Without awaiting invitation, he settled opposite, arranging his hat beside him like a tame bird. The constable loomed dutifully at his shoulder. Swithin swallowed hard, attempted indignation, and failed. "If this is about poor Mr. Harcourt," he began, "I can tell you nothing more than I already have. His death, sudden, yes, but not unexpected. The man's health was precarious." "So convenient," murmured Whimsy. "One is always grateful when a body obliges by dying at the right moment. It saves such tiresome explanations. Tell me, what hour did you leave Ashcombe Lodge?" 5 to 7, Swithin said with relief at being able to produce accuracy. "I remember, because the clock in the hall had just struck." "Which hall clock?" asked Whimsy, silkily. "The one that lags 3 minutes, or the one that anticipates by 5. Swithin's flushed. I couldn't say." "Yet you observed the times so precisely." Whimsy's monocle gleamed. "Curious how memory obliges in one direction and deserts us in another. You carried a briefcase, I think?" "Yes, naturally. Documents." "Documents concerning the family trust?" Swithin's hesitated. "Adjustments. Certain securities had performed badly. Mr. Harcourt insisted on rearrangements." "And Miss Lydia?" Whimsy asked lightly. "Did she approve?" "She is a woman," said Swithin's too quickly. "The decision was her brother's." "Undoubtedly. Still, women sometimes have the inconvenient habit of minding what is done to their livelihoods. Did you and Harcourt quarrel?" Swithin's mouth twitched. "A professional difference. He was obstinate. He refused to hear reason." "Obstinate men," said Whimsy, "sometimes carry their obstinacy into eternity." "Did he threaten to dismiss you?" "No." The denial came sharp, then faltered. "That is, he may have suggested that a different firm could be engaged, but it was temper, nothing more." The constable shifted, but Whimsy laid a hand on the table as though soothing a skittish horse. His tone remained mild. "Temper is an interesting thing, Mr. Swithins. It leaves little shadows even after the lamp is extinguished. You left, therefore, in temper, at 5 to 7, and where did you go?" "Straight here," said Swithins. "I dined. I have been now
here since. Ask the landlord." The landlord, appealed to, confirmed it without hesitation. "Arrived just on the hour, ordered the set dinner, ate it slow, sat there since." "Admirable," said Whimsy. "So you are provided with an alibi as neat as a waiter's napkin. Yet it remains a trifle stained at the corners." Swithins drew himself up. "You cannot mean, you surely do not imply—" "I imply nothing," said Whimsy, rising. "I merely collect impressions like cigarette cards. One never knows which dull specimen will complete the set. Pray keep your glass, Mr. Swithins. The night is damp. Come, constable." They departed under the landlord's curious eye. In the Daimler, the constable gave vent to his bewilderment. If Swithins was here by 8, my lord, and the milkman saw Mr. Harcourt alive at 1:45, how could he? "Exactly," said Whimsy. "How could he? It is a charming problem. So charming that I suspect somebody has been helping us to ask the wrong question." The car growled back towards the lodge. The rain had ceased. The lamp outside the drawing-room shone bright and unrepentant, throwing its accusing light across the gravel. Within, the house was restless, doors shutting softly, a whisper of skirts on the stair. Mrs. Dyer met them, anxious, her eyes sharp as pins. "Miss Lydia has retired, my lord. The servants are in their quarters. Will there be an inquest?" "Undoubtedly," said Whimsy with cheerful certainty. "But before coroners can corone, we must tidy our stage a little. Would you be so good as to bring me the tray used for Mr. Harcourt's tea?" She hesitated, then went. Whimsy wandered back into the drawing-room, where the body lay as if attending a tedious sermon. The lamp guttered faintly, now nearly cold. The slippers stared at the hearth like reproachful sentries. Mrs. Dyer returned with the tray, polished, bare. Whimsy examined it minutely. "And the cup?" "In the scullery, washed." "Could you indulge a stranger's whim and fetch it?" She departed again, reappearing with a teacup and saucer, both spotless. Whimsy bent over them, then peered at the inside of the handle with his glass. A minute crack ran down one side, stained faintly brown. "Ah," he said softly. "One of those admirable cracks that never quite heal. The sort that catch a little residue, however diligent the maid. Mrs. Dyer, does Mr. Harcourt take any special draught with his tea?" "Never, my lord. He disdains such things, save for his nightly dose upstairs." Whimsy smiled. "Then perhaps the cup disdains to be so sure. Thank you. You have been most enlightening." He set the cup down and regarded the scene again. The chair facing the lamp, the newspaper folded across the arm, the ash brushed away too late. "A tableau vivant," he mused. "Our villain has a sense of theatre. He wished the world to see Harcourt alive, or appearing so, at a certain hour. 8:15,
perhaps, but if the curtain is drawn and the lamp arranged, one must also contrive that no fidgeting detail betrays the illusion. Alas for slippers, alas for ash. The constable, struggling, said, "You mean he was already dead, my lord?" "Suppose," said Whimsy lightly, "that the milkman saw what he was meant to see, a figure upright in the chair, lamplight strong, newspaper raised, a trick as old as Punch and Judy, a puppet on its string, and then, when the milkman had passed, and the clock assured the world it was not yet 8, the curtain raiser could be complete." He turned, suddenly eyes bright. "Come, I must see the wireless." The wireless sat squat and self-important on the sideboard. Whimsy knelt before it, examined the dial, touched the switch. No dust. Somebody switched it on, I fancy, then off again. Did Mr. Harcourt listen regularly, Mrs. Dyer? Always, my lord, at 8 for the news. Yet tonight the switch is cold. Wimsey straightened, lips curved. We must ask ourselves whether Mr. Harcourt ever heard that news, or whether he was already providing it. The house seemed to draw in its breath. Beyond the curtained windows, the lamp blazed steadily, indifferent witness to a drama whose lines were not yet finished. Wimsey glanced once more at the chair, then at the mantel clock, then at the hall beyond where time itself disagreed with its neighbour. "Constable," he said softly, "before dawn we shall know whether this play is comedy, tragedy, or farce. For the present, let us permit our actors to sleep. Tomorrow we rehearse again." And with that, Lord Peter Wimsey turned out the drawing-room lamp, plunging the stage into darkness as though lowering a curtain between acts. The house lay heavy with silence, a silence that felt less like repose than the pause between two movements of a symphony. Wimsey, having persuaded the constable to remain in the hall with a notebook and an air of vigilance, lingered in the drawing-room long after the servants had crept to their quarters. He stood with his back to the darkened window, gazing at the dead man in the chair, and hummed under his breath a line from The Tempest. Something about it amused him, though he did not explain. When at last he withdrew, it was to his room at the King's Arms, where a cigar and a dry sherry helped him chart the fragments of the evening on a sheet of hotel notepaper. He drew 3 clocks, each pointing to a different time, a pair of slippers, one splayed, a window gaping to the lamplight, and at the centre a circle labelled simply "The Ring." When the cigar burned low, he added a final note. Was he alive at 7:45, or only arranged? By morning the rain had washed the cobbles clean and left the town smelling faintly of soot and wet earth. Wimsey returned to Ashcombe Lodge, his hat tilted rakishly, his manner that of a man calling on a tedious aunt. Miss Lydia met him in the hall, pale from a night without sleep, but composed enough to show she considered grief an obligation rather than an indulgence. "Lord Peter," she said, with an effort at formality, "Dr. Fenton insists on an inquest tomorrow. He considers the cause straightforward." "My dear Miss Harcourt," said Wimsey, offering a bow, "when doctors find things straightforward, it is generally because they have decided to overlook the interesting bits. Do indulge me a little further, and the coroner shall have his comfort all the same." She led him into the morning room, where correspondence still lay upon a small escritoire. Wimsey seated himself with a languid elegance and gestured to the pile. "You write many letters, Miss Lydia?" "As many as are necessary." "Capital. I only ask because letters are the most dangerous things in the world. They remember what their writers would prefer to forget. Now, if you will forgive impertinence, I must ask about your brother's health. Dr. Fenton assures me he suffered warnings." What was meant by that? He complained of dizziness, sometimes a heaviness in the chest, nothing that prevented him from his duties. Duties of a financial character, one presumes. Wimsey glanced idly at the papers. His accounts, the trust, these weigh upon a man more than arteries. And Mr. Swithins, when he called yesterday, wished to change the arrangement? Her composure slipped. He wished, he urged, that certain funds be sold. My brother refused. He said the market would recover. They quarrelled. Loudly? No, but bitterly. Wimsey studied her face a moment. "Forgive me if I appear intrusive. Did your brother confide in you fears, resentments, a sense of threat?" Miss Lydia shook her head. He disliked confidences. He managed his affairs alone. "Ah, yes, independence, man's last folly." He rose, thanked her, and wandered out. In the kitchen, Mrs. Prout, the cook, was engaged in thumping dough as though it had committed treason. Whimsy admired the process, then inquired with disarming gentleness whether she had observed any unusual comings or goings yesterday evening. "Only Mr. Swithin's," she said with relish. "And good riddance. He puts on airs, that one. Not a man to trust with the butter, let alone money, and the master was none too pleased when he left." "Did you hear their quarrel?" "Not the words, but the voices, sharp like knives on crockery." "And afterwards?" "The master rang for his tea, same as always. Miss Lydia went up. We cleared the tray. Then all in order until Lily screamed." "Curious," said Whimsy, fingering a crumb of dough. "Life has a way of looking in order just when it has gone most out of it. Thank you, Mrs. Prout. Continue your patriotic struggle with the flour." He moved on, summoning James Pike to the hall. The footman came, stiff as a sentry. Whimsy regarded him with sympathy. "You aligned the slippers, James?"
"Yes, my lord, always. And last night? I didn't get the chance. He was already gone when I came in. Yet the slippers were skewed." James's face darkened. "Then somebody moved them after." "Quite. And who had reason to do so?" "I wouldn't know." Whimsy smiled faintly. "Nor would I as yet. But slippers are faithful little fellows. They tell tales when their masters cannot. Keep a steady head, James, and remember that even servants have the right to speak when truth is in danger of being buried with the dead." The footman withdrew, leaving Whimsy to his thoughts. He returned to the drawing-room. The chair sat empty now, the body having been removed to the undertaker's, but the room retained the unnatural stillness of a stage where the principal actor has departed, but the audience lingers. Whimsy examined again the line of the curtains, the cord twisted twice around its hook. He sniffed the air, fainter now, yet still a whisper of camphor, as though a ghost had brushed past. The constable appeared at the door, flustered. "Beg pardon, my lord. A message from town. The borough lads say the street lamp outside was serviced yesterday afternoon. New mantle fitted, bright as brass. Delightful," said Whimsy. "Then we may consider the lamp as a conspirator, not an accident. Somebody knew it would blaze with unusual brilliance. Somebody counted upon it." The constable frowned. "Counted on it? For what?" "For an alibi, perhaps, for an illusion. Imagine it. A passer-by sees the master in his chair, the lamplight showing him upright, newspaper spread. He assumes life where there is only artifice. That is the point, constable. Not what was true, but what was meant to be believed." The constable scratched his head. "Then when did he really die?" "Ah," said Whimsy softly. "That is the question our clocks are quarrelling over. Between 6:30 and 7, perhaps. When tea was brought, when quarrel ended, when solitude was arranged. After that the stage was dressed, the curtains left open, the lamp switched on, the body posed. Only the ash and the slippers refused to keep the secret." He turned, eyes glinting. "We must go back to Mr. Swithin's documents. They may tell us more than their owner intended. And we must inquire whether a certain draught, camphorated perhaps, was available nearer to hand than the doctor supposed." As he spoke, a sudden sound cut the air, a thump, a muffled cry from above. Whimsy was at the stairs in 3 strides, the constable behind him. Miss Lydia's door was ajar. Inside, she stood rigid, her face white, pointing to her writing table. "My letter," she whispered. "The letter I wrote last night, to the doctor. It's been opened." Whimsy approached. The envelope lay torn, the flap clumsily resealed. He lifted it delicately. "Tampering, my dear Miss Lydia, is the sincerest form of flattery. Someone believes your pen more dangerous than
"Poison. Tell me, did you write anything beyond the summons?" She shook her head, trembling. "No, nothing but the request." "Nevertheless," said Whimsy, pocketing the envelope with a bow, "we have evidence that our play has a second act. The curtain is rising sooner than I expected." He looked at the constable with sudden brightness. "Keep the house close, no one in or out. Tonight, I think, we shall need all the actors on stage, and I perhaps will contrive a small experiment of my own." He straightened, his tone once again light, almost mocking. "You see, Miss Lydia, the trouble with murderers is that they are such impatient stage managers. They cannot resist returning to fuss with the scenery after the audience has gone home." And with that, he left her, bewildered, while the house settled into its tense, uneasy watch, the lamplight outside already preparing to blaze for another evening's performance. The house that evening seemed to have grown narrower in its very walls, as though the plaster itself were listening. Whimsy, having spent the afternoon in town with an assortment of inquiries, returned just before dusk and found the servants gathered in small conspiratorial knots, their voices falling silent whenever the drawing-room door creaked. The curtains there, stubbornly undrawn, still gaped across the lamp outside, and the empty chair bore its silent accusation to the street. "Most obliging," murmured Whimsy, pausing on the threshold. One would think the room anxious to repeat its little performance. He turned to James. "Be good enough, my lad, to fetch me the tea things precisely as they were last evening." James looked startled but obeyed. The tray was produced, pot, cup, saucer, little jug, and 2 biscuits uneaten. Whimsy arranged them on the side table by the chair with a delicacy that suggested he was setting pieces upon a chessboard. Then he sat back, one finger tracing the rim of the cup. "Observe," he said to the constable, who had taken up a position near the hearth. "The cup, placed thus, makes a pleasing ring when set down damp. Our unfortunate host left us such a mark yesterday. Yet note, the residue within the crack of the handle persists even when washed. What might have been mingled with his tea, I wonder? Not sugar, not milk, but a draught of a sterner sort. Camphor, perhaps, chloral, perchance. Something medicinal introduced, while the curtains were left invitingly open." The constable frowned. "You mean the poison was slipped in plain sight?" "Precisely. The best tricks are played in the open. The curtains served 2 purposes. They let the milkman and any passer-by see their puppet in place, and they permitted an intruding hand to tamper with the cup without crossing the sacred boundary of secrecy. A servant, distracted by trays and ash, might not notice. A sister writing letters would not look back. And thus a little dose delivered under the very blaze of the Waham street lamp. He stood suddenly restless and began pacing the rug. "But here's the puzzle. If the draught acted swiftly, Harcourt would slump, the illusion ruined before the milkman's arrival. If it acted slowly, our villain must have been confident he would remain upright until the crucial quarter to 8. How does one pose a corpse to wait for its cue?" He paused at the chair, bent, and examined the armrest. His long finger found a faint indentation in the upholstery, as though something had propped the newspaper against it. He tapped it with satisfaction. Ah, a clever stagehand, the paper balanced here, the head tilted just so, the lamplight throwing a neat silhouette, seen from the street all convincingly alive. From within the room one might notice too much, hence the servants kept away until the scream. The constable whistled softly. Then it was murder indeed. "My dear fellow," said Whimsy, with sudden lightness, "did you ever doubt it? What is left now is to discover who had both means and temperament. Our Swithins has his motive, but also an alibi hearty enough to withstand a coroner's sneeze. Miss Lydia has opportunity, letters conceal much, but no obvious gain. The servants are always convenient villains in cheap melodramas. Too convenient. No, our murderer wears a subtler mask. He understood light, timing, and human habit. He knew which details would matter and which could be fumbled with. In short, he rehearsed his play. He stopped by the wireless, ran a hand over its cold dial. And one thing more, Harcourt did not hear his beloved 8 o'clock news, either because he was already beyond such interest or because someone had switched it on, then off again, to preserve the illusion of continuity. But illusions betray themselves. There is always one misplaced prop. Here it was the ash, the slippers, the crack in the cup. Miss Lydia entered then, pale, but with a forced composure. "Lord Peter, Dr. Fenton has arranged the inquest for tomorrow at 10. The coroner is satisfied." "Charming," said Wimsey, bowing. "Coroners are like vicars. They are happiest when everything looks pious and nobody asks awkward questions. But I fear our performance is not yet ready to close. We must provide the good coroner with a finale that even he cannot mistake." She shivered. "Do you mean—" "I mean," said Wimsey, gently, "that tonight we shall recreate the scene, exactly as it was. The curtains open, the lamp blazing, the tea tray set, the chair occupied, though not by the original actor, of course." He glanced at James, whose eyes widened in alarm. "No, no, my dear fellow, you need not swoon. I shall sit in Harcourt's chair myself. It is always best to learn the part from the inside." Miss Lydia looked aghast. "But what if—" "Precisely," said Wimsey. "What if? A most useful question. We shall let our villain supply the answer. If I am right, the temptation will be irresistible. The play demands an encore." The constable shifted uneasily. "Do you mean to bait him, my lord?" "Bait? No, no, only to provide the scenery once more. A chair, a lamp, a newspaper, oh, and a glass, perhaps. Our villain cannot resist adjusting the props, and when he does, why, the curtain will fall rather heavily upon him." The household was summoned. Mrs. Dyer protested, Lily wept, James muttered about impropriety, but Wimsey's airy courtesy disarmed them all. By 9 o'clock the stage was set, the curtains drawn back, the lamp outside glowing with theatrical brilliance, the tea tray upon the side table, the newspaper folded as before. Wimsey, lounging in the armchair with affected idleness, raised the paper before his face and let the lamplight silhouette him against the window. "Convincing, don't you think?" he murmured. From the road one would swear Harcourt lived again. Let us see who bites at the illusion. The constable and James withdrew discreetly to the scullery, leaving Wimsey apparently alone. Miss Lydia, pale and trembling, sat rigid in the morning room, forbidden to stir. The house fell into a tense hush, punctuated only by the distant tick of the quarrelling clocks. Minutes dragged. The lamplight burned unwavering, throwing its steady blaze across the glass. Wimsey yawned ostentatiously, shifted the paper, then let it fall slightly to expose his profile. Outside, the faint scrape of a footstep on gravel. He did not stir. A shadow passed across the window, hesitated, then vanished. Wimsey smiled behind the newspaper. Another scrape. A door opening softly, somewhere toward the scullery. The constable, hidden, shifted his weight. Then, very gently, the drawing-room door-handle turned. The door opened by an inch, then 2. A figure slipped in, moving with the furtive assurance of one who had rehearsed this entrance many times. In the dim lamplight, Wimsey glimpsed the outline of a man, shorter than Harcourt, leaner, moving with precise caution. A hand reached out toward the teacup, holding a small vial. Wimsey let the newspaper drop. "Good evening, Mr. Swithins," he said, with impeccable politeness. The figure started, dropped the vial, and made a dash for the door. But the constable was already there, large and immovable, seizing him by the arm. The vial rolled across the carpet, leaving a glistening trace of liquid in its wake. Swithins fought for words. I came to repeat the trick, my dear fellow." Wimsey rose, dusting imaginary lint from his sleeve. "You should never repeat the trick. The second performance always disappoints. Miss Lydia, summoned by the commotion, appeared in the doorway, her eyes widening at the sight. Swithins, cornered, sagged into the constable's grip. "You cannot prove," he began. "My dear sir," said Wimsey, "proof is a vulgarity reserved for the coroner. But you see, the cup remembers, the clock quarrels, the lamp testifies, and above all, your own impatience condemns you. A man confident of natural death does not creep back to stage-manage it twice." He stooped, picked up the vial, and sniffed delicately. Chloral hydrate, a useful sedative when prescribed, fatal when combined with strong tea and a stubborn heart. You dosed him last evening, arranged the tableau, left the curtains open for the milkman's benefit. Clever, yes, but you could not resist adjusting the scene again when you thought suspicion stirring. Alas, the audience was waiting. Swithin's head drooped. "He would have ruined us all," he muttered. "Obstinate fool, he refused every sound counsel. He would have lost Lydia's inheritance, mine, the firm's reputation. He deserved—" "Deserved?" Wimsey interrupted with sudden coldness. "Deserved, perhaps, a lecture in economics, but not this." Silence settled. The constable secured his prisoner. Miss Lydia sat trembling, and Wimsey, lighting a cigarette with unhurried grace, let the smoke curl upward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said at last, "our little play has reached its end. The curtain closes, the actors depart, and only the critics remain. I should be grateful if somebody would draw those infernal curtains at last. I detest an audience when I am no longer on stage." And with that, the lamplight outside was blotted from view, leaving only the quiet rustle of fabric and the faint echo of Lord Peter Wimsey's ironic amusement. The curtains fell together with a sigh, muffling the blaze of the street lamp. The drawing-room at once felt smaller, as though the house itself could finally breathe without its private grief being displayed to the village at large. The constable, red-faced with the effort of subduing his captive, secured Swithins in a sturdy chair. Miss Lydia, white to the lips, stood in the doorway like a portrait of Victorian propriety, suddenly translated into a nightmare. Wimsey, however, seemed serenely untouched by the drama. He adjusted the crease of his trousers, tapped ash delicately into the tray, and addressed the prisoner with the benevolent courtesy of a host inquiring after the comfort of an awkward guest. "My dear Mr. Swithins," he began, "you will forgive the inconvenience of restraint. We are none of us at our best when cornered, but since you have been obliging enough to provide us with a practical demonstration of your method, I fear we must now rehearse the full scene before the final curtain. Do you object to an audience?" Swithins glared, his jaw tight. "You twist everything. I came back only to confirm. "Ah, yes," interrupted Wimsey sweetly, "to confirm that your puppet still sat neatly in its chair, nodding to the milkman like a dutiful marionette. But, alas, the strings were cut, and Harcourt refused his second performance. Corpses are such unprofessional actors." The constable grunted in approval of this wit, though he scarcely understood it. Wimsey turned to him with sudden briskness. "Sergeant, if you please, let us consider the matter as a problem of time and place. We have 3 clocks, each disagreeing with the other. We have a milkman's testimony, a servant's recollections, and a lamp determined to outshine them all. The question we must ask is not, when did Harcourt die, but rather, when did Swithins need him to appear alive?" The constable rubbed his chin. 7:45, when the milkman passed. "Exactly." Wimsey's eyes glinted. "Therefore the true hour of death must precede that. Swithins, you dosed the tea a little before 7, as you departed. Chloral hydrate, slow enough to permit him to sit, fast enough to overcome him before the news." He slumped. You arranged the paper, tilted the chair, left the curtains open, switched the lamp to full blaze, and walked smartly away. From the street, he seemed alive. Within the house, he was left undisturbed until Lily screamed. A pretty contrivance, spoiled, alas, by trifles. Ash upon the rug, slippers at the wrong angle, clocks out of tune. Miss Lydia sank into a chair, covering her face. Her voice came muffled. "But why? Why destroy him so?" Swithins jerked against the constable's grip, then spat his words with bitter vehemence. "Because he was a fool. He clung to securities that were rotting in his hands. The firm's name, my name, would have been dragged into scandal. He meant to publish the accounts, expose the losses, ruin me and Lydia alike. I begged him to act with sense. He mocked me. He said obstinacy was a virtue. He deserved—" "Deserved?" Whimsy repeated in a tone that cut like glass. "He deserved to be argued with, not poisoned like a sick hound. But there, murderers always believe themselves moralists. One more sermon for the gallows." Miss Lydia shuddered violently. "You used me," she whispered. "You let me believe—" "No!" Swithins cried. "I meant to save you, save us both. He would have squandered everything. You'd have been penniless, dependent upon charity. I meant it for you." Her silence was more damning than accusation. Whimsy, watching with that peculiarly gentle irony that was his alone, struck a match and relit his cigarette. "You see, Miss Harcourt," he said, "the tragedy of murderers is that they are always romantics. They murder not for gain, but for love, or for pride, or for some noble cause which, upon inspection, turns out to be sordid after all. One might almost sympathize until one remembers the man in the chair." The constable cleared his throat uneasily. "Beg pardon, my lord, but what of the clocks? I can't get the sense of them." "Ah," said Whimsy, drawing out the word as though savouring a fine wine. "Our friend here adjusted them. The hall clock, set back, the mantle forward. Why? To confuse the reconstruction of time. If Swithins left at 5 to 7, the hall clock supported him. If Harcourt seemed alive at 7:45, the mantle confirmed it. But my watch, impertinent little beast, refused to be persuaded. Thus the whole illusion tottered. Swithins snarled. "Trifles! Who but you would notice such nonsense?" "My dear sir," said Whimsy gently, "it is always trifles. Murder, like music, depends upon the right arrangement of notes. One wrong key, one false entry, and the whole symphony collapses. You left the slippers awry, you brushed ash where none should be, you meddled with time itself, and time betrayed you." The prisoner sagged then, his resistance draining. He muttered something inaudible. The constable leaned close. "Best come quiet, sir. No use fighting now." Whimsy rose, stretching elegantly as though the evening's entertainment had at last concluded. "Sergeant, you will take charge of Mr. Swithins. Convey him to the station with as little ceremony as possible. Murder is vulgar. We need not add spectacle." The constable obeyed, guiding the broken figure out into the hall. Miss Lydia remained, rigid in her chair, staring at the extinguished lamp. Whimsy regarded her with a softened expression, his voice low. "You must not blame yourself, Miss Harcourt. Murderers borrow the faces of friendship, of counsel, even of affection. One cannot always distinguish mask from man. Be grateful only that his drama ended before it ruined you entirely." She lifted her head slowly, her eyes weary but clear. "And you, Lord Peter, how did you see it all when none of us saw anything?" He smiled faintly. "My dear lady, I did not. I merely listened to what the house was saying. Houses are dreadful gossips, curtains, cups, clocks. They chatter endlessly to anyone who will condescend to listen, and sometimes they even tell the truth." She gave a strange, small laugh, half despair, half relief. Whimsy bowed, as if in salute to her courage, then made his way to the door. The constable was waiting, Swithins in tow, the street lamp outside still blazing like a witness with no tongue to lie. As the prisoner was led away, Whimsy paused on the steps. He looked up at the lamp with an ironic smile. "Well, old fellow," he murmured, "you have had your triumph tonight. Let us hope the coroner enjoys his little matinee tomorrow. For myself, I think I have earned a cigar." He descended the steps, the night air damp upon his face, and the curtains of Ashcombe Lodge at last drawn closed behind him. The performance was over, the stage darkened, the actors dismissed. Only Lord Peter Wimsey, humming a scrap of an Elizabethan madrigal, remained to stroll into the wet and waiting dawn. The dawn that followed was pale and indecisive, spreading across Little Barton with the washed-out air of a stage after its scenery has been struck. Villagers, roused by the gossip of the night, clustered discreetly by hedgerows and shop-fronts. They whispered about the lamp that had blazed too bright, the curtains that had gaped too wide, and the lawyer who had been taken away under escort like a thief of hens. At the King's Arms, Whimsy breakfasted with impeccable calm, dissecting a boiled egg as though it were an obscure Latin idiom. The constable, less at ease, shifted heavily in his chair. "Beg pardon, my lord," he said, "but I can't fathom why Swithins came back. If he had fooled us once, why not let well alone? Why return to fuss with the scene?" Whimsy smiled. "Because, my dear fellow, murderers are poor playwrights. They cannot resist improving the lines after the premiere. Swithins believed suspicion was stirring. He hoped by some subtle alteration to erase the traces that condemned him. Alas, he merely wrote himself a second act, and very badly staged at that." The constable grunted. "And Miss Lydia? She looks nigh broken. Understandably, to discover one's fortunes nearly poisoned with one's brother is not conducive to sleep. Yet she is resilient. Women of her caste treat calamity as an occasion for starch. I have little doubt she will be in black crape before luncheon, writing polite notes of gratitude to sympathetic neighbours." He finished his egg with deliberate leisure, then pushed back his chair. "Come, let us be off to the inquest. Coroners are like schoolmasters. They delight in a prompt pupil and abhor any appearance of tardiness." So the inquest was held in the panelled chamber of the town hall, beneath portraits of aldermen who appeared perpetually affronted at being disturbed. The coroner, a portly gentleman with a fondness for sonorous phrases, presided with the gravity of a minor archbishop. Dr. Fenton attended, pince-nez flashing, eager to certify apoplexy until forcibly prevented. Miss Lydia sat in the front row, erect but colourless, her hands folded like a marble effigy. Swithins was brought in under guard, his face pale and stubborn, though his eyes darted restlessly. A murmur of curiosity rippled through the onlookers. Whimsy took his seat with airy unconcern, greeting acquaintances with ironic nods, as if the proceedings were a tedious but necessary entertainment. The coroner called witnesses in turn. Mrs. Dyer gave her evidence crisply: the curtains, the tea, the tray, the discovery of the body. Lily wept through hers, insisting she had forgotten the curtains by accident, that she had noticed nothing strange save her master's stillness. James described letting Swithins out at 5 to 7, hearing words too low to catch. The milkman swore to seeing Mr. Harcourt upright at 7:45, lamplight on his face and newspaper in hand. Dr. Fenton rose importantly to declare that death was natural, arteries fragile, apoplexy the clear cause. His voice swelled like a sermon, satisfied to dismiss all darker possibilities. Then Lord Peter Wimsey was invited to speak. He rose with languid grace adjusted his monocle, and began as though commenting on a cricket match. "Gentlemen, ladies, it is a small matter of detail. We are confronted with a trifling collection of facts: a cup with a crack, a lamp too brilliant, a pair of slippers awry, and clocks unable to agree even with themselves. Individually, these are of no more interest than a curate's sermon on punctuality. Together they compose a narrative. Shall I read it to you?" A stir ran through the room. Whimsy continued, his tone light, but his words precise. Mr. Harcourt quarrelled with his man of business at 6:30. At 5 to 7 the businessman departed, briefcase in hand, but not before dosing the master's tea with chloral hydrate, a draught too slow to prevent him raising his cup, too swift to permit him enjoying the evening news. Harcourt slumped. His killer, having no wish the world should suspect, arranged him upright, paper in hand, curtains ostentatiously left open. At 7:45 the milkman passed. He saw precisely what he was meant to see, a living man, but it was an illusion, as empty as a child's puppet show. Dr. Fenton attempted a protest, but Whimsy's voice cut across like steel under silk. Apoplexy does not explain the scent of camphor in a cup. Apoplexy does not adjust clocks to contradict one another. Apoplexy does not draw curtains back when every housekeeper in Christendom insists they should be closed. Only design explains such trifles, and design, gentlemen, is the handwriting of murder. He let the words settle, then turned his gaze upon Swithin's. "You, sir, returned the next night to erase your own handwriting. You carried a vial to adjust the scene once more, but alas, the theatre was already occupied. You walked on stage and delivered your confession not in words but in actions. The constable and I were your audience. We applauded, and the play is over." The coroner, shifting uncomfortably, murmured about strong suspicion and remand for trial. The townsfolk muttered their satisfaction. Miss Lydia closed her eyes briefly, as though to steady herself. Swithin sagged in his chair, silent, a man already rehearsing the speech he might deliver to a jury. Later, as the hall emptied, Whimsy lingered by the doorway, speaking softly to Miss Lydia. "You have been very brave, Miss Harcourt. I fear society will gossip cruelly, as it always does when finance and scandal walk together. But you must not suppose yourself diminished. Your brother's stubbornness may have provoked resentment, but it was Swithin's vanity that brewed murder. Vanity always leaves fingerprints." She looked at him with tired gratitude. "What will become of him?" "The law will decide, and you, I hope, will take comfort in order restored, though it be purchased dearly. My advice, draw the curtains each night, if only to remind yourself the house is once again your own." She gave a faint smile. "You speak as though the curtains mattered most." "They do," said Whimsy. "Murder is always discovered in the things most ordinary. We expect daggers, we are undone by dust on slippers. Draw your curtains, Miss Harcourt, and the world will think you safe." That evening, the Daimler bore Whimsy away along the damp road. He hummed a scrap of Purcell, reflecting aloud to his man Bunter, who had rejoined him after errands in town. "You observe, Bunter, that our villains sought to defeat time itself, turning clocks forward, dragging them back, playing conjurer with minutes and hours. But time, obstinate fellow, will not be deceived. It always strikes in its own rhythm, whether men approve or no. The lesson, Bunter, is that trifles like seconds are never trifling. They march us inexorably to the gallows." Bunter, with the tact of long service, merely replied, "Indeed, my lord." And Lord Peter Whimsy, settling deeper into his seat, allowed the smoke of his cigarette to curl from the window, a thin white ribbon dissolving into the misty dusk. The case of the maid who never closed the curtains was concluded, the audience dismissed, the critic satisfied. The stage of Ashcombe Lodge was dark at last. The countryside beyond Little Barton had a way of softening scandal, muffling it in hedgerows and hedging it about with polite phrases. By the following day, talk of Harcourt's sudden demise and Swithins's shameful arrest had already begun its transformation from shock to anecdote. The butcher declared it had been bound to happen to that family, always too much pride, while the postmistress, with a sniff, said it served as a lesson never to let lawyers meddle with one's tea. Even the vicar, who ought to have known better, managed a sermon on vigilance which was really about curtains, though his congregation chose to interpret it as something to do with sin. Whimsy, who disliked sermons unless they contained Greek quotations, attended only to the last faint chords of gossip before withdrawing. He had remained in Little Barton long enough, and the Daimler was waiting. Yet there lingered one final scene, an epilogue as it were, before he could permit himself to fold the programme of this performance and tuck it away in his collection. Miss Lydia requested a word with him privately at Ashcombe Lodge. She met him in the very room where the lamp had shone too brilliantly, though now the curtains were decently drawn, their heavy folds concealing both the lamp and the village's curious eyes. The chair where her brother had died was gone, replaced by a prim arrangement of flowers that looked faintly embarrassed to be there. "I wish to thank you, Lord Peter," she said, her voice composed but low. "Without you the truth would have been buried, or worse, distorted. Yet I cannot feel entirely grateful. Do you ever wonder, when you unmask a criminal, whether justice has not cost more than it saves?" Whimsy, balancing his monocle with that peculiar, absent-minded dexterity of his, regarded her gravely. "Frequently, Miss Harcourt. In fact, one might say it is the chief inconvenience of my hobby. Truth is a dreadful fellow. Once admitted, he insists on rearranging the furniture, and never quite leaves the place tidy again. But I flatter myself he is preferable to lies, which breed like mice in the wainscot." Her lips curved in the faintest of smiles, though her eyes remained dark. "And yet my family name will be spoken of in whispers. The papers will be merciless. I am left alone with nothing but this house and its echoes." "My dear lady," said Whimsy gently, "solitude is at least honest. Whispers, like curtains, may be drawn, and behind them one may live in comparative peace. The scandal will pass. What endures is that you are alive, and that your inheritance, however diminished, is secure from further depredations." She clasped her hands tightly. "Do you suppose he, Swithins, meant what he said, that he acted for my sake?" Whimsy's smile thinned. "Murderers always mean what they say, at least at the moment of saying it." He persuaded himself it was devotion. In reality, it was pride masquerading as gallantry. He could not endure to be proven wrong by Harcourt, nor to admit his own failures. Pride, Miss Harcourt, is a most expensive luxury. It costs other people's lives. Her silence was her answer. Whimsy, moved by a rare touch of compassion, rose and offered her a slight bow. "If you will allow me a word of advice, close your curtains every evening, but open your windows to the morning. It is a good discipline, for houses and for hearts." She inclined her head, and he withdrew, leaving the room lighter for his absence. The inquest, as foreseen, declared murder. Swithins was committed for trial, though he never stood in the dock. The night before his removal to London he contrived to hang himself in his cell with a neckcloth, leaving behind a note of incoherent justification that satisfied nobody, least of all himself. The village, with the brisk efficiency of rural gossip, considered the matter concluded. Whimsy, however, lingered in thought. On the road out of Little Barton, he remarked Bunter, who had resumed his rightful place at the wheel. You will have observed, my good Bunter, that the central clue was not the poison, nor the clock, nor even the witness of the lamp, but the curtains, always the curtains. A maid neglects to draw them, a housekeeper scolds, a passer-by observes, and behold, the whole drama is illuminated, literally, for all to see. Yes, my lord, said Bunter serenely. It is curious, continued Whimsy, how civilization depends on such domestic trifles, curtains, slippers, teacups, all the little rituals of order. Break one, and murder slips in. I sometimes think crime is only the natural consequence of bad housekeeping. Very true, my lord. And yet, Whimsy mused, we rely upon these same trifles to expose crime. The crack in a cup, the dust on a rug, the misaligned slipper. They are the whispers of truth in a household determined to keep silence. Remarkable fellows' trifles, they betray their masters with the fidelity of spaniels. Bunter, whose spaniel-like loyalty was a fact unspoken between them, allowed himself the faintest smile. For that evening, back in London, Whimsy dined with Parker at his club. Parker, listening with professional interest to the account, shook his head. You have a genius for making the grotesque sound almost entertaining, he said. But it was sordid enough. Finance, pride, a few drops of poison, that is all. All? Whimsy raised an eyebrow. My dear Charles, it is everything. Pride and finance have toppled empires. Poison has altered the course of dynasties. Why should Ashcombe Lodge be spared what Rome and Byzantium endured? Parker laughed. You always enlarge your murders into allegories. Do you never tire of it? On the contrary, said Whimsy, reaching for his glass, I find it keeps the mind sharp. After all, a murder is merely a very small war, private battles fought with teacups instead of cannons, and one must never neglect to study the strategy. He sipped, then added with a twinkle, Besides, Charles, what would you have me do? Collect stamps? Later still, alone in his library, Whimsy turned the case over in his thoughts one final time. He had before him the cracked teacup, rescued from the evidence with the coroner's indifference. He set it upon the mantel, regarding it as one might regard a relic. A pity, he murmured, that men must always imagine themselves playwrights when they attempt crime. The stage is too honest. It reveals the scenery even when the lines are well rehearsed. Our poor Swithins was undone, not by malice, but by his desire to control the performance. He wished to direct the gaze of the world, and in doing so, he guided it straight to his own hand. He smiled faintly, quoting half to himself, half to the silent shelves. The play's the thing, but not, alas, to catch the conscience of the king, only of the solicitor. The clock chimed softly in the corner. Whimsy raised his glass in salute to the cracked cup, then extinguished the lamp. Thus ended the matter of the maid who never closed the curtains. The village resumed its gossip, Miss Lydia her solitude, and Lord Peter Whimsy his ironic detachment. Another puzzle solved, another stage darkened, another reminder that in England, even in its quietest corners, the polite drawing-room may conceal a crime as theatrical as any melodrama. And Whimsy, strolling out into the night, with his hands in his pockets and his monocle glinting faintly, murmured an epigram to the indifferent stars. "Draw the curtains, ladies and gentlemen. The show is over."